Here, Finn.
Nah, probably copping for my mom's.
That's why?
Look, I told y'all. I just want them gone. Just want them away from me and Buck.
The fuck you do to you?
All right. Take care of it, boss.
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com.
Hello. I'm Toby. You're here with us on Caught on the Wire. We're up to, I think it's episode 10 now, isn't it? Misgivings?
That's right.
Am I right about that? Yes. So it's me, it's Toby, and it's Alex Cottrell as well, as always. So how has your week been treating you, sir?
It's been very busy. Just started a new job doing some teaching. So that's been the main thing of the week, really, is just getting to grips with that, because I've not really formally taught before, but it's a good employment, I think, if you can get it.
Yeah, good bit of experience, good bit of employment, definitely.
So that's been taking up a lot of my time, because I'm taking on a lot of students at once, so that's been my time. I mean, that's not really related to TV or anything, but that's been my week.
Just a little catch-up. No, certainly. Yeah, well, it's good to be here. Should we quickly go and see who else has been checking in this week?
Oh yeah, well, we've got a few emails, I think.
Yeah, we have some regulars, some not so regulars. Damon, of course, a very, very regular provider of info and entertainment. So this week, Damon reckons we should do a top 10. One of Damon's personal favourite facial expressions on the show is not
this
a
is top
smile.
10 facial expressions, yeah. That's
right, yeah. So Weebay's surprise face when Stringer says, well, Shorty was a cop, but she ain't dead. And that's, as Damon says, one of the most commonly memed scenes from the show. That face of Weebay in utter shock. It's always pretty good. And also the sinister what face that Avon gives Stringer after D reveals the truth about D in Season 3. So I think that's following on from what we were saying last week about there being some pretty fantastic moments of facial expression in the show, mainly with Prez, but it's always nice to hear some other equally good ones as well. So,
yeah, that's why I was talking about doing a top 10, because there are just so many great reaction faces to pick from. But as we mentioned before, Prez would definitely dominate that list for us. I also would like to add on what you were saying there, that was a controversial use of meme as a verb.
Oh, okay. I said
memed?
Did I say memed? Oh, wow.
Memed.
That wasn't even me.
Is that a word? Are we introducing that into the language now? To be memed, or something that has been memed? What's being memed, though? The meme itself?
The scene itself is being memed into internet culture. Does that work? It's not even paraphrased from Damon. That's just something that's slipped
meme
off from the tongue, really. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good catch. Anyway, it completely sort of passed me by.
Shouldn't it be mimesis?
Whoa, mimesis.
Surely.
Mimesis.
I think that's a cooler word. It's better than memed.
The mimesis.
Makes it sound very sophisticated if it's like I'm undertaking mimesis.
Yeah, because is meme come from emotion, or is that the original origin of the word, is it? And we've just taken it into this sort of highly Latin, amazing new phrase, mimesis.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's certainly strange. Also heard from Corey, who sent us a nice lengthy email this week, which we enjoyed reading through. He's actually just started listening to the podcast. Wish he'd found it earlier. And has a comment on a recent episode, plus a few comments going back to even the pilot. So certainly good to hear about these. The dinner scene was probably hammed up a little, but overall I think it's believable and fits thematically with The Wire. The show is largely about groups that have been marginalised by society, and I think in this scene the kids were forced to confront this fact. I see parallels between this scene and D'Angelo's restaurant scene, which you guys mentioned, but I think it's also similar to a scene with McNulty talking to Kima about dating D'Agostino. He mentioned that he feels like he doesn't belong to any world that even fucking matters, which I can imagine is what the kids may have felt, which can help explain the bad mood they're in afterwards. So there we have it. That's a nice contribution to what we were saying last week, because I know Damon had some thoughts about what may well have fueled that difference between the kids as they went into the restaurant and as they came out.
I guess it felt a bit unusual because, I don't know, up to that point, maybe a lot of the points that are trying to make about certain section of characters is maybe not quite so on the nose, so obvious. Whereas this scene, it does feel a bit sudden. I think somebody emailed in last week saying about it that it just felt very sudden.
It's a real sort of fish out of water moment, isn't it? Yeah.
So, going back to what you were saying originally about it being hammed up, do you think it was maybe overacted? Is that a problem with it, or?
It's hard to say. I mean, in the context of the show's acting style, it seems to fit. It's certainly quite an extreme scene, as we were talking about. It's a very unique scene, which is why I've really picked it out. So therefore, we can expect to some extent to feel a bit different in this scene, and for everything to be a little bit more heightened. So I don't feel personally that it was overacted, but I can understand how that jarringness might have sort of led it to feel a little bit hammy or camped up or something like that. Yeah.
Or, alternative perspective is that the scene, by being that way, makes you feel uncomfortable, but that's also the whole point of the scene, is to be uncomfortable, that the kids themselves are meant to be awkward. Like, it seems to translate that awkwardness to us, but we receive it in a strange way, perhaps.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if it feels hammy to us, that's probably just, as you say, the result of the discomfort that the show is trying to
that maybe that's the direction that's being given, is it needs to be really awkward and uncomfortable, and as a result, it does feel that way amongst the other scenes. So, yeah. I don't know if that's a more optimistic perspective, I guess.
There's an awful lot we can say about that scene. Like, it really does really bring the conversation, doesn't it? There's also another scene referred to, a question about Randy. In Season 4, Episode 2, there's a scene where the kids are spotted by a car stolen by Donut. Carver calls it in, and one of the officers who responds to it is Officer Walker, who chases Randy and captures him. He confiscates Randy's money. What's interesting about this scene is he asks for Randy's name, and Randy replies, Randy Wagstaff. You likely remember Walker's response, ain't no one made that shit up. My question, isn't Wagstaff Cheese's last name? Are Randy and Cheese brothers?
So going back, quite a few episodes here.
Yeah. Unearthing a Wire bit of, I guess it's a bit of memorabilia. I know that Simon has mentioned this in interviews, hasn't he, that there was an intention for a further storyline to connect the two characters of Cheese and Randy. I think there certainly wasn't enough time. As we can see, there's not been one appearance yet of Cheese in Season 4. They clearly haven't quite had time to incorporate his character yet. And yeah, it's odd how little involvement he does have in much of the show, but he's still very memorable. And for me, I think that would have been one connection too many, actually. If Cheese and Randy were related, it would have felt a little bit too...
It's bordering. It would be bordering on incestuous, perhaps.
Definitely, yeah. And it's, I mean, as we've talked about the show's sort of various coincidences before, and they're done in a way that none of it ever really feels sort of, manufactured or anything like that. But for me, on paper, just hearing about that was a possible plan, I'm kind of glad that it wasn't put in there, because it does just feel like one connection too many. And I don't really see how that may have led for a great storyline. Potentially it would have done. But yeah, it is interesting how their surnames match up like that.
doesn't seem like something that would be a coincidence. There are a few coincidences in the Wire as a whole. A lot of it is just too deliberate for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just perhaps sort of one link too many. All those neighbours related, as you were saying. And if we quickly go to Corey's final point, going back all the way to the pilot, going back to August last year, guys. So when D'Angelo is taken to Orlando's, the song "Use Me" by Bill Withers in the background. This song is very fitting for many characters, especially D'Angelo, who openly allows other people to use them. I see this as a prequel to the chess scene. And there's also a scene near the end of the episode where Bunk and McNulty are drinking and talking. Bunk tells a story about how his wife made him come home recently to kill a mouse. He did so with his service weapon. McNulty asked what he did with the carcass. He said he cleaned it up, but thought about leaving it as a warning to the others. This was a humorous scene, but I think it was meant to contrast what happens 1 or 2 scenes later, when Gant is shown killed in the middle of the project, as a warning to the others.
Yeah, both really excellent points. Yeah, I like it. I hadn't really thought about the "Use Me" tune before, but that's definitely a good spot. The Wire has shown that it likes to use music in the background to deliver these little messages, either for something going on in the scene or something coming up.
And
So
you've generally been pretty good at spotting those links, actually, but clearly it's a skill that we learned on the job here. And
that's our excuse. Season 1 is the excuse.
Yeah. Well, that is going back some.
As for the Gant link between when Bunk and McNulty are talking, I think that's a good spot as well, about being a warning to the others, as he says.
Oh yeah, certainly. It's sort of, at the time, it feels like a very, a little bit of an indulgent story, just to display the personalities of these cops, get us to know them, let's see how Bunk's a hilarious sort of drunk fella. And yeah, of course, underneath all that, there is a very, very nice and subtle connection to the crux of the episode at the end, where Gant is shot, as he talks about the idea that the mouse should be used as a warning, in the same way that Gant is shot down to make an example. So yeah, definitely a really nice spot there, and a great example of sort of the subtleties of the show.
Yeah, it's great. It's just great writing, really. You're not going to put a scene like that in unless you plan to use it in some way. I mean, you can use it to show character, I suppose, but if it's what is otherwise a fairly inconsequential story, there's usually some implication somewhere within it. You'd expect a good writer to recognise when the time is to use that. Like the Wire presents, for example, the mundane in a really interesting way. I think we've talked before about especially investigation scenes where you're literally just watching them figure stuff out. It's pretty mundane, man. It doesn't feel the need to jazz it up. It just lets us watch. That in itself, just being given the opportunity to just
by that, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, it's not really forcing you, but it's it encourages you to feel that way. Yeah. It encourages you to take in more than just face value or something that's applying to your senses as hard and fast as possible. It's not just trying to overload you. It's letting you almost enjoy the frame for a period of time.
Oh, definitely.
Rather than constantly needing to be looking at new things over and over, we can just enjoy this nice slow progression of a scene. And yes, it's satisfying as a result. Obviously, the McNulty and Bunk, again, classic pair for this sort of thing, when we have them doing the famous season 1 scene with the investigation. The single-word investigation.
Yes, of course. Yeah, there's so many season 1 memories we can unearth it, aren't there? Absolutely. But yeah, of course, that's a distant memory for us now. With McNulty,
going back a bit. About a year ago, I would have thought.
Yeah, more than a year ago, and of course, McNulty's now very much missed from season 4.
Oh yeah, he's barely about, although he features a little bit in this episode.
That is true, yeah. That they sort of have a little catch-up, don't they? What's McNulty been up to, and how's he doing? So we will get to that scene. It's an excellent scene. Should I pass over to you for the flashbacks, for the recaps?
Yeah, the recaps. So, it's a bit of an odd one, this episode. It is very much, big... It's very knotty. Something about it feels very knotty. There's just lots of intertwining stories going between a small number of strands. It's hard to really pin out individual elements. So, for example, we have the major crimes unit, but in this episode it also covers what happens with Bubbles because it's Herc and Bubbles. And if you split the two up, you end up talking about the same story twice. So they have to go as one, and it's the same thing for like the Western District, which covers all sorts of things. You've got Carver and Namond. You've got what's going on with Colvin later on. We have
McNulty
like when Mello's talking to Daniels, because that's in the Western District. You can't really split all of it up because a lot of it's related to the same.
And then of course Stanfield is Bodie's and Michael's stories are also thrown into that one. So it's sort of covers all sorts, really, doesn't it? Which
but it makes sense with Bodie because he's part of Marlowe's crew. So I
suppose so. Yeah,
it's reasonable to consider.
I've always liked his Bodie corner sections in the past, but yeah, he certainly is. Let's not forget that he's a member of the Stanfields.
Yeah.
But on paper, that should create for a tighter episode, for a more tightly plotted episode, essentially.
Yeah, I've put together quite large sections for the strands. So some strands are just one section. So politics is just one big one.
Okay.
Major crimes is just one big one because it's a really neat arc. So you can just talk about it all as one, which I think will actually work better in this episode. So we also have the Western District, which I mentioned before, Stanfield Organisation, and then there's one for the school as well.
Okay, all right, let's bring it on.
Let's not start off as the episode does, and begin with the politics.
Okay, or in this, as this episode likes to call it, the Clay Davis section.
Yeah, it is basically Clay Davis, but it also deals with Carcetti, and they have Nerys Campbell and Burrell featuring in it as well. So there's a little bit of political gaming going on. Let's take a look. We've got Clay Davis meeting with Irvin Burrell and tries to reassure him that he is safe from Rule's plans to unseat him now that Carcetti has won the election. Davis believes that Burrell's race is his trump card, but urges him to impress the mayor with police work. Burrell is at a loss for how to act on this suggestion. Davis later meets with Carcetti and Namond. He brings up Burrell's precarious position, and Wilson reveals that they hope that his supporters will be swayed if they attract a better candidate. Davis offers to provide the pay rise they're looking for in return for a future favour. But Wilson sees through Davis's intentions and recognises a further con, but is uncertain what his plan is. Finally, Davis convenes a meeting between Council President Nerys Campbell and Burrell. Clay and Burrell attempt to convince her that Daniels is an unsuitable candidate for commissioner. Davis asks Campbell to provide half of what the mayor has asked, and then immediately leaves the room to call Carcetti's staff. So basically,
Clay's
the adventures of Clay Davis. I particularly like this first one where he's with Burrell, and it's sort of not so much words of wisdom as just political flailing. Whatever it is that you guys do for a living, just do police shit and something will happen.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
Totally useless advice.
Clumsy communication. And just certainly reducing the idea of making an impression through this police work. And it's quite funny because Burrell actually seems to follow the advice and actually makes a very coherent political stand from it. But just the way it's been given out here, or at least sort of implanted as an idea, is kind of hilariously Clay. And there's a big grandstanding about everything. So, But overall, I like, despite the language, he's making a good point about trying to, make yourself indispensable, make that impression. And, you sense Carcetti won't see through any ploy at this stage with these guys planning things out.
Especially the decision that they actually make to start doing all of these, stat duking all over again.
Oh, certainly. It's really quite scary to see all these really important political figures meeting in a room, and you realise how closely they're all linked, and how so many people's influence are riding on Burrell maintaining his position. with Clay leading the charge here. And they're all plotting to sort of maintain their collective control of politics, which, you know, they kind of have above Carcetti just from what they've established over the years. So it really is a meeting.
They have a vested interest in the status quo.
Definitely. So a sort of meeting of the witches here.
Yeah, I suppose it is in a way. Witches and warlocks.
And of course, on the flip side, it really reminds us, you know, how substantial reform would be if Carcetti could follow through with his wish and fire Burrell at this point without having to worry about political backlash. You know, so many corrupt city officials have a lot of influence to lose on riding on that, and you know, he'd fix up a lot of his department, I guess.
Yeah, and he's had to rely on someone as slimy as Clay Davis, whose sliminess actually is almost on the point of being contrived in a couple of places in this episode. He's just so kind of ridiculously sneaky and conniving. You know, thanks for your time. You know, he's just so kind of like trying to be really smooth about, whilst knowing exactly what's going on.
Yeah, it's that gravel voice, isn't it? That sort of matches mine today for some reason. But yeah, there's some real shady tones to that Clay voice.
The favours for favours.
Oh, certainly, yeah. And of course, he then goes to see Carcetti, and he plays completely the other face. He still maintains the right amount of weasel, so that no one's being fooled here properly. But you know, it's this sort of other pleasant face where he's saving face and being on the mayor's side.
Well, this is where I think he's particularly slimy in this scene.
So he can morph the political spectrum to Carcetti's liking, apparently. If you promise loyalty to me, come your governorship. That's kind of the deal he lays down on the table in as many words. So,
yeah, pretty much. It's just, I guess he's smart enough to know a winner when he sees one.
Yeah.
And wants to be along for the ride.
Certainly, and of course Norman.
It's just ensuring his own ascension with Carcetti's, I guess.
Yeah, you just got to build on the strengths, haven't you? And as much as they'd like to sort of go against Carcetti, they have to, in some ways, perhaps go with him to keep themselves. It's just self-interest, isn't it, really? That's what it all boils down to, as with most things in The Wire. But yeah, I do love how Norman puts it once Clay has finally left. Sort of nails in the coffin. And, of course, he throws in his nice own impression, possibly to compete with ours. But, yeah, it's always nice to hear the show acknowledging the whole Clay Davis shit thing.
Do we know exactly where that came from? Is that just something that the actor did, or was it scripted? Or because I don't know too much about that.
Yeah, so from what I did read back in the day, it was this is a Isaiah Whitlock Jr. signature. And it's
he uses it in other things.
Yeah, so it's a bit of improv that he just brings to his work in various places. So I think that there has been the other shows that have been on, like he uses it and people assume it's a bit of a Wire parody thing, but it's just an Isaiah Whitlock Jr. thing. So it's certainly interesting. I'm not sure if all directors are going to be happy with it, but certainly obviously that the guys on The Wire didn't seem to object to it, and they seem to use plenty of instances of the whole shit thing, and I'm glad they did, because in some ways it's the most famous thing the show sort of has ever produced, in terms of people that actually are aware of the show.
I'm not too sure what else he's been in.
No, I can't actually think of anything by name, but he has a few spots here and there.
He had a bit part in Goodfellas, according to this.
Okay. Again, another example of an actor who didn't quite get a jump from an amazing show like this just because of recognition, really.
I know he's on quite a few things. I'm just looking at it here. He's been on quite a bit. Right. So yeah, that's we have our political section moving on to the meeting with the council president.
That's right. Let's quickly mention that Carcetti is now the mayor, so he's no longer the mayor-elect.
That's right, yeah. They talk about the fact that they... Was it 85%, 86%, something like that?
Yep, so they won 82%, which is quite low.
That's it.
That's right. Considering the city is 89% Democratic, it's a slightly disappointing percentage, but nonetheless, he's got the mayorship. So
yeah, I mean, it doesn't really make much of a point of it, as they say themselves that it is a bit inconsequential. Like, there's only not that, but it's there's only going to be one turnout.
Yeah, just I thought it was just worth mentioning as a bit of a landmark thing we can tick off in our Wire Nerd book, I guess so.
Yeah, that's that bit sort of acknowledged.
Yeah.
And then, so Clay's final meeting that he puts together is with Nerys Campbell and Burrell. They just try to hammer home this fact that Daniels is not suitable for commissioner, just in order to safeguard Burrell's position. And Carcetti's hope of getting this improved salary is completely backdoored by Clay, who comes in and convinces Campbell to just give him half as a teaser, make him think that they can draw on more in the future, but still not actually enough to cause the revolution in their upper echelons of the police force that they might be hoping for.
Yeah, it's sort of the perfect figure to appease any protests, but not for him to make any waves with it, for it to really actually provide its purpose. So it's again very shrewd on Clay's part. I love the way that Clay describes it as unarsing. You have to unarse a salary bump here for Carcetti. So get it out, that sphincter.
And then goes outside to deliver the news to Carcetti's staff, and he makes quite a point about passing on the message that Clay has his interests at heart.
Yeah, like that's not a voice message, that's a poem or some sort of fairy tale poem that you're sending him. Like, it's just only Clay could really get away with that.
Yeah, I hope that was passed on word for word.
Yeah. Yeah, so a very corrupt political base with a few brains on them, Nerys included. They still kind of have this power to gut the system from within, as long as they can hold on to this influence they have and ride out the sort of impending changes that might rock them a little bit. So, good little scenes to see there.
And essentially the politics strand boiling down to, as we said before, just the exploits of Clay Davis. Yeah,
it's a bit of a change of pace, isn't it, this week? Which is interesting. I think Carcetti's actual appearances this week are in the Western District for a little change. So
it's nice to have a bit of focus on Clay because he is an intriguing character.
Yeah, and he doesn't pop up anywhere near enough. I think in our memories he's a sort of prominent character, but he really does have a little moment here, a little moment there.
But it's a great performance.
Yeah, that's what it is, really, isn't it?
That's what makes it. Right, let's move on to the Western District then, which is probably our biggest section. In fact, it's definitely our biggest section.
Okay.
Right, so Donut cruises the Western District in a stolen car until he is spotted by Officer Walker. Donut tries to drive off and hits several cars as he veers around the streets. He manages to escape when Walker collides with another vehicle. The officer later tracks Donut down to his hangout and finds him with Kennard. Donut initially feigns ignorance, but once he is cornered, he attempts to run. Walker catches Donut and breaks his fingers. Later, Donut tells Namond and Kennard about his injury as they work on their corner. Carver makes an efficient raid on the corner and arrests Namond when he finds narcotics. Namond is unable to contact his mother because she is out of town, and Carver explains that he will have to spend the night in juvenile booking. Namond is terrified at this prospect, so Carver allows Namond to sleep on a bench in the office. So, first pretty meaty section there, we have our opening scene with Donut, and then we have, that leads us towards Namond, and then Namond gets caught and is finds himself in a bit of a neglect case, as Carver mentions it, and has to sleep on the bench because Carver, with his heart of gold, he just can't bring himself to scare Namond like that in the way that Colvin might have been tempted to. In a way, the years have perhaps hardened Colvin, so he would be happy to do that. But when he passed on that knowledge to Carver, Carver being younger and perhaps a bit more optimistic, wasn't prepared to do that to someone like Namond, who I think we really do sympathise with here. Carver is absolutely right. Like, it's unbelievable the way that his mother treats him, and it's nice to see another character acknowledge that.
Oh, yeah. He's kind of lucky that his mum was over in Atlantic City and then going on to New York, because it does force Carver to develop this new perspective on Namond and how he actually has no close family. And obviously Carver knows that Namond's moved onto the street quite recently, is keeping tabs on these things. So that's not really the product of his intent necessarily, and he totally sees that from the conversation he has with him in the department. So yeah, really, really good scenes between these two. Nice little development for Carver and Namond. And I like how he refers back to Weebay's original line as well about the ponytail when he scoops him up, making it clear that, Weebay had a good point about the whole, you got to prepare yourself for the streets properly. You can't sort of do half-hearted attempts. As Namond has sort of obviously tried to do here to avoid the full force of things.
The actual, before the raid on the corner, as it were, it's nice to see that Namond's corner actually has a bit of business now. We do see sort of a car coming and going and people coming to collect. It sort of demonstrates that the building that Namond wanted to do actually kind of has worked. Now he's been put in this position, he's ended up on this new corner where he's going to be, and he's actually got a bit of business now. He is building in that sense.
Yeah, I guess it's the inevitability of the seasons. Yeah, he's gradually getting this little supply chain going. So,
despite everything, he's getting the hang of it.
Yeah, definitely.
But this is obviously quickly stopped by Carver, who obviously reached the breaking point. They've had their fair warning, and he's now going to show them what it's like. And I like that as he's sort of putting the cuffs on Namond, he asks him whether he's enjoying it, and if he's having fun,
I think his attitude changes a lot once he brings him back in. And
well, that's right. I mean, he's not quite able to go quite that far to push him into the dreaded baby booking.
And let's not forget, of course, like, they ring Namond's mum multiple times, and she has this rule that when she goes on gambling and shopping holidays, she will not answer her phone under any circumstances to her own son, like her own school-age son, until she's back. And Namond says as much. That's her rules. Like, it's just unbelievable insanity here when you just hear about the way the parenting works. Like, no wonder Carver was just so desperate. Well, not just he was helping big time here, and he really felt he needed to.
Yeah, I mean, one really wonders what kind of how a mother-child relationship builds into that. There's kind of a whole other story to be told there about how on earth it ends up being that cold and removed and like employer and employee,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's just you got to fend for yourself when work hours are over. That's all I am to you.
So, yeah, I do sympathise with Namond here. This is another tough point for him.
And of course, that's coupled with his fear that he just portrays in his face when they mention baby booking, and he's no longer putting up any facade here. He's just having to embrace his genuine fear to get his point across it, and he's certainly more willing to do so now that he's spent a bit of time in Bunny's class, we sense.
I suppose he is a bit more, in a way, he's more comfortable with Carver, whereas when he was around, at the dinner scene, for example, when he's around Colvin and the other kids, he's not as comfortable there, not able to really let himself go. Whereas here, he expresses himself very freely rather than awkwardly because he wants to make it clear to Carver that it's quite desperate not to have to go away into baby booking.
Definitely, yeah. And the big difference, obviously, there's no friends around either, so there's no one to impress and to make sure you regain the attentions of or anything like that. So he can just sort of be himself here, which is unusual for Namond. Did we mention the stuff with Walker and the whole opening?
I was about to say, yeah. So we've worked backwards here.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the very first part of this section, which was, as you say, the opening scene.
It's a scene to avoid, really, isn't it? It's really grim, like really, really grim.
Yeah, it's a horrific opening scene.
Yeah,
we sort of start off with our action scene, opening with a bit of action. A very different kind of police chase, though. There's no flashy manoeuvres or anything like that. In The Wire, the police chases are just cause loads of accidents, and Walker, whilst he is trying to uphold the law, he just has this terrible attitude that poisons everything that he does, and he ends up hitting into someone's car just as badly as Donut does, and
yeah, well, I think
totally
arguably he's
unsympathetic towards the person that he's driven into.
Oh yeah, typical Walker, yeah, certainly.
He is shown as a real piece of work. I mean, it's hard to think of many other characters who are as consistently reprehensible as Officer Walker. He just doesn't have anything redeeming about him at all.
No, he's just the most sort of self-absorbed and just completely sort of sadist character, I guess. That's just the word for him, really.
I mean, Herc is a bellend, but at least he's funny.
Yeah, and he has an ounce of sort of compassion for other people. There is a little
he has
bit
a very
of
minor amount of ambition.
And,
yeah. He has a minor amount of ambition and feeling, whereas Walker is just Satan himself.
Definitely, yeah.
Except for maybe Marlowe.
It's one of those, you can put him on the list. You can put Marlowe on the list. You can put.
But again, Marlowe is
Levy.
smart. That makes he's smart and has a certain sort of bizarre power, sort of respectability going on there. You just kind of respect his organisation and the way that other people respect him, and there is smarts in the matters, and how calmly he destroys people. But with Walker, he's just horrible all the time. There's no
I mean, we never see him investigative. We never see any sort of investigative policing from him, but
no,
we can assume that he's not great at it. But perhaps he does have some brain cells when he does put his mind to it. But the show never goes as far to show us that. So it is certainly weird and a very odd scene at the start. A little bit, a little bit of a zany opening for The Wire, which starts kind of comedic and then really does descend right down into a pretty dark hole.
Yeah, it's a interesting choice to, like you say, start in a way that is meant to be a bit funny and then crush us with brutality.
It really is, and it's one of the few times that they employ one of those kids outsmart the cop scenes. And it feels like a classic example of that. Oh yeah, Donut's going to run. He's going to change his clothes. And he's going to blend in with a different crowd. But as we're talking about Walker being smart or not being smart, he does actually see through that. It's one of the few times that the cops sort of win out there. So it backfires, and
the way that he stood over him just before the opening titles begin is quite scary. This sort of large man of great power, as it were, sort of leaning over this helpless child whose fingers he's just broken. Like, it's very, very sinister ending to what starts off as rather light-hearted. But that's The Wire. They're quite happy to crush your spirit when necessary.
Certainly. And he's actually putting off his paperwork to spend time enjoying himself with this pastime. Just unbelievable.
Are we to believe that, he's representative of a number of Baltimore's own police force?
Oh, right. Okay, that would be a grim little metaphor for them. I wouldn't say so myself. That would be dark. Too dark.
Don't know. Don't have the facts.
Yeah. There are no facts
Strikes
on
me
one of
as
those things.
does strike me as pretty extreme,
Yeah.
but I don't know. People can surprise you. Right, let's move on to the next section then of the Western District. We have Lieutenant Mello hosting the roll call briefing. He asks for progress on a recent spate of church burglaries. McNulty suggests that he liaise with Officer Baker as they are investigating 2 separate burglaries. Mello introduces the idea of making arrests for quality of life violations so the arrest statistics will improve, and tells his men that the order comes straight from the Commissioner. Officers such as McNulty and Santangelo are against the idea of arresting people for open container violations. Mello agrees, but insists that they need to do so anyway. Colicchio takes to the new orders along with the other officers outside a bar. McNulty appears ready for backup, but refuses to participate in the ticketing process. And he tells Baker that as a patrolman, they are entitled to the one true dictatorship in America, which is choosing how to spend their shift. He then shows the paperwork, suggesting to Baker that his time would be better spent on the church burglaries, and explains a pattern that he's noticed in the incident reports. Baker eventually agrees to follow up on the lead with him, and as they are talking, behind them a riot is brewing.
Alright, so McNulty's back in the frame for a little bit, more than we've been used to. And we also get to go and see the roll call again, which is a bit of a Season 3 staple. It certainly feels like a little while since I've seen Mello getting up on stage.
Again, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's nice. And, of course, it's a little bit strange this time around. For, obviously, our typical Western District roll call checkups, most of the guys seem to reject the idea of more stats, which is a little bit unusual. But clearly, it does kind of feel feasible that the 2 beacons of Carver and McNulty sat on each side of the room, gradually shifting the attitude of these officers here, potentially, as we've got to know them grow and develop. And, it's quite promising to see that these guys are actually rejecting an instruction of bring me more stats.
Not only that, but there's a principled stance on open container violations in particular. As there is supposed to be an established respect in Baltimore with the paper bag, the one that Colvin obviously talks about in relation to the drugs instead, and sort of adopting that idea with narcotics.
There's a certain right to privacy, to an extent, sort of thing.
Man's drink was his business.
Yeah.
That's sort of a line they don't wish to cross because I guess it's also partially to do with the fact that, they probably like to do a bit of drinking in public themselves.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Makes sense. And of course, Mello mentions that this has come from the Commissioner himself. And of course, at this stage, we don't know the truth of that. It leads us to some nice speculation, whether this is Burrell's, as Clay put it, show them some police shit. And this certainly looks like it could be a Burrell demonstration to piss off Carcetti, which of course is later on revealed to be the truth. So it's certainly a very good sort of bargaining chip that he's opened here by doing this.
What did you think of McNulty's arrival on the scene where they're doing all of this ticketing for the open containers? And to me, it felt like at this stage, McNulty just resorts to his sarcasm from the sidelines. We might expect him to utter the same words here with more anger, but he does genuinely seem a lot more calmer about his views on this situation, and he's happy to watch the mess unfold. He turns up and makes some, thought through comments about how much rubbish it is, and how, Baker is essentially going along with the herd. Sort of very sarcastically points out that he that's fine police work there, as he puts this ticket on the car. He's just quite happy to let it happen though. So we were saying before how much of what McNulty was doing was really genuine, and if it was masking, maybe a deep-seated fear of just who he might become if he, if he let himself fall into that. But for whatever reason, he has become. It seems to have actually become this character now. He seems to embody this new, calmer, smarter, more responsible McNulty that we see with Elena later on.
Yeah, it is weird, isn't it? There's elements of just the old McNulty there, but they're all a bit more toned down. And certainly in this scene, it's just a case of him gloating and giving a somewhat sanctimonious lesson here.
I just feel like this is in a way, this is now a more natural McNulty. He kind of retains a lot of that, what we expect from him, but now in a more responsible manner. So yeah, it feels like something's really clicked here for him, and he's no longer, well, certainly from our perspective, we have mentioned before how we sometimes feel like it's a bit forced. But seems a lot more comfortable now. Yeah,
there's no sort of alcohol to fuel his anger rages moments, as it were, and it's nice that he's actually gloating to benefit someone else rather than just sort of for his benefit. Well, for everyone else's benefit around the room. You know, he's sort of obviously learning some lessons here and not being so bogged down by the drink. But yeah, he's certainly sort of floating around what it looks pretty chaotic and taking sort of the high stance on things about his very raw, pure approach to patrolling. And I do quite like the whole one true dictatorship in America. That's quite a clever likening of the job.
Sounds like a David Simonism.
It does, doesn't it? You can totally see it coming out in an interview.
But it does work, I think.
And you can totally see, obviously, Colicchio leading the charge as one of the key supporters of the old stats, and absolutely loving this new mandate where they just
he does have a bit of a dictator's moustache.
Old Colicci. Yeah. No, there you have it, and it is pretty ridiculous. I think they just start giving tickets to everyone parked outside their church, don't they? It certainly seems to rile up people inside to a great degree. And it's interesting how all these churches are getting burgled. It seems to be a bit of a theme of this episode. And
it's like a minor little bit of police work for us to see McNulty do.
Yeah. I don't know if there's possibly a link here with Carcetti. Obviously, he's having problems with the ministers wanting Burrell to stay in power. And if the church burglaries continue, could that be a good platform for Carcetti to convince the ministers that they need a change? I don't know, but that never plays into it. But that is one possible link there. Yeah,
maybe it's demonstrating a potential angle, but these angles don't necessarily have to be spotted by the people that they're intended for. It's just something that we see but is never picked up on.
Definitely, yeah.
It's a potential, isn't it? You could say to them, this is the problem with the crime. We've got some other people that can solve this problem, or hire a new commissioner who can tackle these issues.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like Burrell doesn't want to do this. He doesn't want to actually reduce the actual crime. He just wants to create stats or whatever. There's something that they might be able to sell to them. But it's not picked up on for whatever reason, and it's just a small bit of police work that we see McNulty do, essentially.
Indeed.
And have we met? I think we've met Baker maybe a couple of times before, or have we met him before?
Not too sure, actually.
Is he used in any of the earlier scenes where we have? I'm
normally pretty good on all these little ancillary characters, but Baker doesn't ring too many bells. Aaron Carster, sort of a similar looking policeman, potentially, that they've borrowed from. No, but Baker doesn't ring a bell. Maybe I'm wrong. Please let us know if you have got the
I'm sure he's knowledge. In season 3. I remember Baker in that.
Okay. No, maybe I'm just having a little brain fart. I'm not too sure. But no, sorry.
I think. Yeah. Baker is, in, I think it's the first episode of season 3, and we have Colvin introducing those 2 new patrolmen. He's asking them all the questions like, "Where are you at?" and
That's right. One of them's Aaron Carster.
The other one is Officer Baker.
Okay.
Brian Baker, to be specific.
Oh, right, there we go. Yes,
which a quick search has revealed to me.
There is a link back then. Okay, that's just one of the ones that I haven't retained. So yeah, that's certainly cool to know. That these patrol officers are kind of linked all the way through the show.
So yeah,
Is
they
there anything
managed
else?
to keep another character connected, which is good.
Oh, yeah,
as for
definitely.
anything else in that little section there, no, that's about it. We just had the roll call, and then we had the enacting of the orders they were given.
Yep. Okay.
So let's move on to the next one. So after roll call, Carver tells Namond he must find somewhere else to stay. He begs Carver to call his teacher, Mr. Colvin, and Colvin suggests sending Namond to juvenile booking, but with some encouragement he agrees to call his wife to see if Namond can stay with them instead. At the Colvin household, Namond is polite and charming. Namond also catches Colvin's nickname, and Colvin intimidates him into not mentioning it to anyone. He eventually returns Namond to his mother the following day and is introduced as Namond's teacher, but she rebukes his kindness and berates Namond for being afraid to go to baby booking.
Could have guessed as much from Delonda.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, Namond finds himself with a very charitable guardian. So Colvin is quite happy to take him home. I think he talks about when he brings him home and tells him that he's like Edie Haskell, doesn't he, or something, or Eddie Haskell, something like that.
Yeah, some sort of old reference. Yeah. So it's
Which I think
yeah.
is meant to be a reference. I looked it up when I was actually watching the episode, and I seem to recall that the character, like Eddie Haskell, is a character in some sitcom from years and years ago who was like basically overly polite.
Oh, okay.
It was like sort of irritatingly polite, sort of insincere politeness. So, yeah, Colvin was basically saying that he was that.
Right. Okay. That certainly makes sense. Doing the British thing.
You are, son.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and in terms of the polite skills on display, it's a very, very big contrast to what we saw last week. And clear evidence that Namond does have it in him. And placed outside the deep waters of that high-end restaurant, he's sort of capable of showing the gratitude that should be expected of him. I quite like how the scene also, it reminds us that it's not necessarily all on the kids what happened at the restaurant last week. How real that this scene is this week reminds us kind of that there's this element of fakeness to these high-end restaurants, and that the kids didn't know whether to buy into or accept as a part of the experience, like the deliberately fabricated elements of the restaurant for your enjoyment. The fact that you have this hostess that's very smiley, doesn't necessarily really care about you personally, but paid to smile at you. Someone's paid to read the dishes of the day to you. There's the very, very sort of formal dress. It's all these things that are sort of building up barriers and sort of creating an element of fabrication that just keeps people uncomfortable.
Yeah, I guess it was like there was too much theatrics for them. Essentially, it's not being particularly straight with them, like you say, especially with someone like a hostess who is essentially paid to be nice to you, and read out all of these things on a menu that all the food seems unnecessarily complicated. But in this more domestic setting, he obviously is a lot more comfortable and, like you say, perfectly capable of good manners and geniality.
Certainly, yeah. And no, so I guess the two big differences are no surrounding social pressures, which is partly brought around through just the lack of friends that are here as well. He's just got no barriers to put up, and it's a real pleasure to see the real Namond through this scene.
Yeah, definitely.
And Bunny's pretty cool wife, who we only ever see once, but serves a nice little role here. Just a nice touch
that the fact that we've been hearing Colvin being called Bunny in so many ways since we first met him as a character, but you forget that not everyone necessarily uses that nickname.
Yeah.
Obviously, Namond spots it, and
it's a nice reminder of
Rightly
how.
so, pointing it out.
For us, Bunny is just Bunny. It's just been an established, ingrained thing. But Bunny's name, it is quite fluffy and big earsy, really, like to be street worthy or to be credible on the street. So it's nice how Namond does mention that and makes us, reconsider how we think of that name, because it's just sort of become this thing. And a very deadpan Colvin to the rescue with the whole balls in the jar thing. It's a little bit sinister on Colvin's front. That's the most extreme he goes in the show, I think.
Yeah, I think it is just a bit of a show, but it is quite, like you say, quite a dark one.
Yeah.
Seems to deliver it with quite a lot of sincerity. And then the next day, Colvin ends up returning Namond to Delonda, of course. And her only response is to have a go at him for being scared. That's literally just it. She's, stay away from my son, and you should be ashamed of yourself for being scared. And that's all that was said after she doesn't seem at all concerned that her son was in a position where he had to, stay at someone else's house because she was uncontactable. And
oh, definitely, yeah.
First instinct on the way back is, right, you're in trouble. It just doesn't seem to be any, maternal empathy at all.
It's just
how has this relationship developed?
Yeah, I mean, whatever Namond tries here, he's just never achieving the recognition that she should be giving him. And certainly no niceties made for Colvin's sake. You'd have thought that there might be a little bit of tact going on there, just to at least suggest that things are okay, and not give Colvin such a dire, calling need to go and adopt him. But it really shows
she doesn't have
how
any
important
tact,
the lessons.
that woman.
Yeah, it's just completely off the scale, and how important the lessons of gratitude that Namond are being taught are when you compare it to the way Delonda's lived, and obviously therefore what Delonda means to Namond as a role model. This is the first exposure he may well have to gratitude if this is the way that she acts.
Right, well, let's move on to the next section then.
Yeah.
So, at the end of their shift, McNulty and Baker bring in a pair of suspects. The desk sergeant initially tells them to send the suspects in line with all the other detainees until he hears that they are responsible for their church burglaries. The sergeant is then relieved that some real criminals are actually left in Baltimore, as the police station is filled with people arrested for minor infractions. McNulty later goes to dinner with Bunk and their sons, and Elena arrives to pick up the boys and is impressed to find that they have done their homework. She becomes further impressed when McNulty turns down a drink, and she expresses regret at the end of their marriage. So McNulty, again, sort of finishing off that little bit of police work that we saw. We're also seeing the effect of Burrell's police shit, and it is certainly causing a mess, as this place is just filled with people who are probably being put away for loitering or having their trousers too low or whatever it is.
Yeah, so because of Burrell's police shit, is McNulty's arrests, are they unusual for that reason because they're against the grain of the stats, or is McNulty's arrests are they genuinely very McNulty-ish and out of the ordinary, even under normal circumstances? It's hard to say. I guess it's the second one, and he's clearly showing more of an investigative strategy that you wouldn't normally find in patrol, and he's obviously looked at all these church burglaries on a map and in terms of timings, and then obviously looked at the pattern, and he's sort of scoped the next church that he thinks will get burgled and has come up trumps with it, completely caught them in the act. McNulty being McNulty and really taking this proactive initiative, which is a very the endearing aspect of McNulty. That's what he brings to his police work.
And it's shown to be non-destructive. It's shown to be used in a way that enables him to continue to be responsible. Even though none of this investigative work is really shown, we able to deduce that it's clearly taken place, and that that's it's able to be a very positive contributor to his patrol work. Like you say, going a little bit beyond the expectations of that standing. But we all know that he's a good detective, and he's using that in his role here. And it's I guess on a, dare I say, small enough scale that he doesn't have to go too deep and start becoming too obsessive, and as a result, becoming rather self-destructive as a result.
Yeah. Nope, definitely. So obviously that stands out in the booking. They're bringing in some real felons, much to the surprise of the shift lieutenant or whatever. And,
it's interesting that everyone knows it's a big joke. Everyone that we see in the police department seems to be aware of how much of a big farce it is. They just go along regardless.
It's pretty cool because that attitude was not suggested at all, I don't think, in season 3. It was so ingrained as a normal thing that there now seems to almost be this shift in culture that people are seeing, that the stats game has just some elements of ridiculousness to it.
Well, I think I mentioned before, this is maybe some episodes back now, but I seem to recall mentioning how, although Amsterdam is depicted as a big failure and it's just all knocked down, I think the effects of what Colvin decided to do with Amsterdam are still felt, because it does change a certain consciousness about the city, and people tend to be more accepting of certain ways, and even Royce himself ends up trying to spin it in some way in order for it to make sense. It does actually seem to change people's attitudes.
That's a very good point, actually, yeah.
And this is another example of it. Like you say, I think the effect that it had on the police force, maybe it made them more accepting of the idea.
It's sort of permeating down.
Yeah, it's like this sort of painful first time, and then the sort of certainly not enjoyment, but there's a acceptance to it happening the second, and these ideas become ingrained, and people become more accepting of them, and then they become commonplace, and we're just seeing an example of that here, I think. So it wasn't all in vain. I think Amsterdam has still had its effects, and we're still continuing to see them a season on.
It's a splendid idea to keep season 3 in the picture, definitely. And I do like how this scene here with McNulty making these proactive investigations is layered with the stuff at Namond and Colvin's house, really, with Namond, where they're obviously making a lot of progress over there, with Namond learning his manners and seeing a different perspective on life. So you know how I always like to pick out a little scene layering or two each episode, so there's my dig in for this time around anyway.
And then I suppose we should mention the little bit that we have with we have another dinner scene. This time the kids seem a little bit awkward as well.
Of course,
they don't seem to actually respond to anything.
Classic.
They're awkward in a
silence.
different way.
Yeah. And the McNulty's kids have just shot up, haven't they? Like I swear they were still little babies, like in season 3.
Yeah.
And they've suddenly had that growth spurt, because they're definitely the same actors.
Yeah.
So
yeah, certainly are.
They've gone down that mopey teenager phase that the show is having to depict here. And I do quite like the scene. It's just sort of this catch-up, check-in moment for us with McNulty, isn't it, really? And Bunk, who we haven't seen in a while as well. I like how Bunk suggests that his kid's going to be a paediatric neurosurgeon.
Yeah,
or at least considering it.
Paediatric neurosurgeon phase, in fact.
Which of course follows on from what Albert wanted to be in the class, oddly enough. So good. And of course there's the obligatory bring back Elena, just to just sort of demonstrate the process or the progress even more from McNulty's point of view.
Yeah, even she is convinced somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there was
Meanwhile,
really
Dennis
much...
is Dennis.
Yeah, her response to the Dennis question was like quite... Yeah, it's oddly sort of honest, wasn't it? And not particularly positive. But there wasn't, I don't think, much feeling behind... Obviously, there's meant to be quite an important line at the end there where she's like, oh, if only I knew you were going to grow up to become a grown-up.
I like that.
I'm not really sure that is suggestive of real regret there. She's been through too much for that, but it is a nice just way of getting across that sentiment, certainly. It's cool that she says that.
Yeah, it's a nice little turn of phrase.
Yeah.
Ready to move on to our final Western District section?
Yeah, sure.
So Mello takes his concerns about the new strategy to Daniels, who is reluctant to execute the arrest hikes ordered to them by Burrell. After hearing that neighbourhood people are being locked up in what appears to be an unnecessary arrest hike to serve Burrell, Daniels agrees that it's just more of the same from command. He goes straight to the mayor and presents the information as indicative of Burrell's new initiative to influence arrest statistics. Carcetti's outraged and questions Daniels' reasons for bypassing rules, and Daniels explains that it is a test of Carcetti's commitment to change in the police department. Carcetti reminds Daniels that he already has his word and thanks him for going outside the chain of command. So yeah, obviously Carcetti finding out here that Burrell has just gone and done the very thing that he's been trying to avoid when he made, he really pitched his tent, as it were, on the crime stats, is causing a bit of a mess by starting a whole new stats game, and is obviously also making a bit of a point. Carcetti can't actually get rid of him, and he's just going to rub that in by, doing the old stats game as well.
Yeah.
He's going to be both immovable and make a big mess at the same time.
It is bold, and it's clearly very rehearsed. It's a fantastic speech. Sort of every word has been very measured. It's interesting that they choose to have this scene at the Carcetti headquarters as everything's being stripped away into trucks and taken back, almost as if to expose the truth in the room now that the campaign's over. There's no more banners to hide behind. You now got to show me what you're actually bringing to the table. And, of course, there's also plenty of car alarms blaring throughout the background of this conversation. Just to draw attention to the, real importance, I guess, of what they're discussing here. And how Carcetti chooses to react to what's going on here is going to be a real indication of his integrity.
Yeah. It's interesting that Daniels is continuing this. It's almost like a character check on Carcetti. He just wants to make sure that he's entirely serious, which is, I guess, telling of Daniels' experience in sort of finding his way further up the ladder. And that there's that suggestion of him having done dirty things in the past and maybe trusting the wrong people, getting involved into the wrong places. So he wants to know if Carcetti's intentions are actually, a bit purer than those that he might have worked with in the past. Because it's his own reputation on the line as well, if he's going to end up in a situation where he's potentially commissioner. Yeah,
and of course, that's changed considerably already since that last episode scene, remember, with him and Rhonda sharing the spaghetti over the new day that's coming in.
That's right, yeah.
Already there's this sort of complete, sort of flown back down to earth kink in the armour for Carcetti, who is, in the firing line for the first real time as far as Daniels is concerned.
Yeah, he's very quickly had that the optimism of that idea shaken out of him, which leads to, like you say, his concern with Daniels.
Yeah, maybe things really are changing. Okay,
so,
anything else?
Yeah, maybe things aren't going to be so fucked up.
You just have to laugh, don't you, unfortunately, as a seasoned Wire viewer.
It's pretty ridiculous. But yeah, that's about it for the Western District. Let's move on to the Stanfield organisation, which again covers a few things that we obviously deal with Marlowe and Chris, but we also have Michael as part of this as well, and Bodie and Poot, and all the other sort of people in between dealing with these characters. So the Stanfield organisation expanding and as a result, the strand itself is expanding with it. Let's start with Bodie and Poot as they discuss the change in the weather, just before little Kevin returns after several days' absence and explains that he was taken in by the police for questioning about the murder of Lex. His friends urge him to go straight to Marlowe and explain what happened so that there is no doubt about his actions. He does as they suggest and faces hostility from Marlowe and Chris when they learn that instead of organising a meeting with Lex himself, he passed the task on to Randy Wagstaff. Marlowe nods to Monk, and as little Kevin is told to leave, they bundle him into the back of an SUV. Chris asks Marlowe about Randy, and he states that Randy is in no position to hurt them, but Snoop reminds them that Randy is likely an informant and suggests that they spread the rumour around that he is a snitch. As Kevin is being driven away, Slim Charles arrives. Meanwhile, Omar and Ronaldo observe Marlowe as he conducts his operation from the courtyard. Omar recognises Slim Charles from his time with the Barksdale organisation and remarks that the association does not add up. So, we have Bodie and Poot. They end up encouraging little Kevin to go to Marlowe, which leads us to the courtyard. And then following that, we have Omar and Ronaldo watching from on high.
Okay, so we're going over quite a big chunk of the episode there. Yeah.
Yep.
So obviously we kick things off on the street where it's very cold and people are making points about this. And this comes straight after the scene at the school where Prez is complaining about the heat.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, it's a nice touch that we have Bodie talking about how it's too cold outside right after Prez is telling Grace how it's too hot in his classroom.
It's just this weird lack of satisfaction wherever you look, but not necessarily the same problem.
Yeah.
And it's obviously feeds quite nicely into the epigraph that deals with climate change as well. There's some sort of very not fully developed themes about that temperature stuff going on, but I quite like them nonetheless. There's stuff to be discussed about them. And yeah, it's just again
telling them that they're just getting old.
Yeah, it's quite tragic, isn't it?
Aren't they supposed to be about 18?
No, Bodie's 20. He started 16 in season 1 and obviously grown for 4 years since then.
Oh, okay.
I believe Poot's a little bit older. But yeah, it's nonetheless, you could not describe that as old. I don't think under any circumstances. And they're kind of humouring themselves that they're discussing the weather, talking about retiring on holidays in the Bahamas. So it's tragic stuff, but Bodie's convinced, and he has outlived a lot of people that are on the streets that we used to know on the show. So by that measure, is he perhaps old? If he's outlived the majority of those around him.
Yeah, relative to his comrades.
Yeah, so that's a point that he again brings up with McNulty a little bit later on, and it is really odd to contemplate that if you're a soldier who can survive on the street in this game for more than 4 or 5 years, then you are kind of this dinosaur.
Then little Kevin returns from Herc and Dozeman and Sidner, having, as he truthfully states, not really got any information out of him. And he is told to go straight to Marlowe, who otherwise maybe doesn't realise that it might be seen as a bit suspicious, which leads us to the courtyard. That's obviously a decision that Bodie ends up regretting, him being the one to actually tell little Kevin to go to Marlowe straight away, which he does. And when he gets there, he finds himself, in a bit of a trap, really.
Yeah, of course, us with the prior insight, we knew from the start that would be a terrible decision, because we know that Marlowe is now making decisions based on, it's not based on real calculations, it's based on sort of potential problems and the assumption. It's just very cautionary, basically, over-cautionary. So it was clearly going to end pretty badly.
I suppose there is a certain taking for granted when it comes to Marlowe's position as well, now that he has the ability to make people disappear thanks to Chris and Snoop. Anyone who is even a minor issue to him is just gone and doesn't no longer has to be thought about or dealt with. They can just be disappeared and that's all sorted. Generally speaking, these things don't stay that way forever.
Yeah, it's something has to give, but at the moment, yeah, Marlon doesn't have to worry at all. He can get rid of whoever he wants without facing any consequences. And it is just a real scary situation. I guess it wasn't...
In the spirit of that impunity, it's little Kevin who, unfairly so, ends up being bundled into the back of that SUV.
I mean, it wasn't the most articulate explanation of the events. I mean, I think the whole thing with Randy does muddy the waters, really, doesn't it? It sort of makes it sound a little bit shiftier than it should be or needs to be, and you know, you sense that was perhaps the crutch that got him killed. But yeah, it's pretty grim how quickly it happens. It's just straight away in the back of the car, heading off to the Vacants.
Yeah.
And of course it's witnessed by Slim as well. He sort of pops around at the end without any explanation. Just so that Slim can kind of be disappointed himself. And then of course when he goes to see Bodie later on, we understand what they're talking about and why Slim is involved. So that's just a way to sort of link to later on, I guess, yeah.
And it's also Snoop's doing, essentially, that Randy ends up getting bullied all around at school for supposedly being a snitch.
Yeah, which is odd because when Marlo says, you know, put that out there that he's a snitch, it's almost relieving because you realise that they're not going to actually want to kill him. But what actually happens following this, you could argue, is perhaps a worse, you know, fate worse than death. Certainly controversial, but yeah, this is a real turning moment here. Following Herc's fuck up, it's time for Marlo to enact that fuck up into something that's pretty painful.
Yep. So, yeah, with we also have Omar and Ronaldo observing all of this that's going on, and they see Slim as he arrives, and of course, Omar recognises him, and must see this as being a bit confusing. We have mentioned before, though, how it's a bit odd how, I don't know, a bit behind the times Omar is. And I know he spent a little bit of time, you know, I suppose he was in prison for a very short period of time, but why is he not particularly caught up on the whole Marlo situation? He still seems to be picking up the basics of the organisation, which is a bit odd considering that he is a major kingpin. He's the kingpin.
He is the king of scoping. He watches everyone and learns everything. But clearly he hasn't had time to be doing that with Marlo recently. I guess that...
Well, I'm thinking the king here is Marlo. I mean, he basically has this whole Baltimore drug scene under his thumb in a way. It certainly feels that way. Yet somehow Omar doesn't seem to know all that much about it.
It's weird, isn't it? I guess they're perhaps suggesting or alluding to the fact that Omar's still kind of hung up on the whole Barksdale thing. And that is why, despite the fact that Marlo is kind of his new target, when Slim Charles steps into the circle, that's where his attentions turn. And he actually ends up scoping Slim. We see later on in the taxi cab, he follows Slim to, I think it's some sort of Prop Joe hangout somewhere. But it's that infatuation, that need for vengeance, that is, again, still clouding his judgment despite the fact that Stringer has gone and vengeance has been served. He's, just pissing off those around him who want to do the real work, want to do the money-earning work, and he's there with his very much emotional connections to the Barksdale still.
Right. Do you want to move on to the next part for Stanfield?
Yeah.
So Slim visits Poot and Bodie and welcomes him home. Slim asks how Bodie is getting along with Marlo, and he also tells him that Marlo had Kevin killed. Omar tails Slim back to his home, and the monotony of the task begins to annoy Ronaldo. And later Bodie and Poot discuss Marlo's actions. Bodie is angry that Marlo killed little Kevin without proof that he was working with the police, but Poot draws a parallel between Marlo's order to kill little Kevin and Stringer Bell's order to kill Wallace. but Bodie argues that Stringer's order was justified in that Wallace was working with the police. So yeah, Slim is delivering the bad news.
Definitely, yeah. It's sad times. And of course he catches up with Poot as well. There's sort of a link with that opening episode where Slim does roll by and still re-ups for Bodie, and things are just getting more and more fierce, essentially. And it's all pretty sad stuff, and that of course leads to a much sadder scene with just Bodie actually later on when he reflects on Kevin's death and his involvement with it.
Well, we were talking about great reaction faces. And though whilst it's certainly not funny, it is definitely a good one from Bodie, and it's really tragic. And you can see just this lingers on his face and his response to the news. So it's quite hard-hitting bit, that even though it's just a close-up of his face, basically. It's just a great performance.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And then there's obviously that zoom out from him on the corner, on his old dying corner. And we get to see a campaign poster for Royce, re-elect Royce, sort of rusting in the corner, just reminding us of the joys of the old administration before things change, basically.
Yeah, this is corner nostalgia, isn't it? This is wishing for... It feels like what was a simpler time when Royce was in charge and we knew what to expect from the corners and who owned what. And that's all just been turned on its head.
Yeah, and I guess he feels eternally older, considering these facts now. So, yeah, sad stuff. Are we going with the Poot discussion, or is that a little bit later? I think, is it?
No, they discuss Marlowe's actions. Obviously, Bodie feeling it to be somewhat in because of his own actions. He's the one that told little Kevin to actually go and see Marlowe, so he essentially sent him to his death there.
Yeah,
we're getting another season 1 callback about mentioning Wallace. Where, of course, that it's interesting to hear that being justified as, oh, well, he was working with the police, so it was okay to kill our best friend.
Definitely, yeah.
It's a clear change in attitude.
It's just getting a bit confused on the whole game, isn't he? Like, even with the Kevin thing, he's just continually underestimating the game, I guess, and in the process he's falling further out of relevance with it. He's no longer this important part of it. And a harsh reminder to him of how even, he must have lost an iota of trust from Marlowe and how much he wants to get out, but he's this committed soldier. And I think little Kevin's death is very much an enabler of Bodie's death later on. It sort of provides that foundation of distrust of Bodie's crew. That when Bodie sort of winds up with McNulty for a couple of hours, throws them over the edge on that. It's all the pieces matter there. It's really pretty tragic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a black mark on their record.
Definitely.
And they are never quite thought of in the same way again.
Yeah, and then of course there's the bit where they discuss Poot is apparently very much more wizened to the world, more so than Bodie. And, he's very calmly saying, the world is a cold place and I apparently accept this and you apparently struggle to accept this. And obviously there's that weird discussion where they compare Wallace and Kevin. And we see that Stringer really did have, based everything on business rather than just sort of a vague bit of caution.
Yeah, that's right. In comparison, it's it does feel more justified for them because there was some kind of planning and action around that, whereas here, Marlowe simply just made the decision, well, that could be a slight issue in the future, so let's just have him killed.
Yeah, it really is just, just no respect for life whatsoever, really. Should we quickly mention the Omar amazingness when he does that incredibly camp sort of arrival from sleep, I guess is the best way to put it.
Oh yeah, it does make it look like a music video, doesn't it? where he kind of like pops out. It looks like he's about to start singing or something. But
I've seen that heavily memed, as I put it, quite a few times. So I thought that was just worthy of a mention. Anyway, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it is quite an amusing pop up. Right, yes. So let's move on to our final part of the Stanfield organisation, where we're dealing with Michael, who shows Snoop and Chris his stepfather when he is buying drugs for his mother. Snoop asks Michael why he wants him killed, but he declines to explain further. But Chris seems to have more insight into the reason and agrees to do as Michael asks. At the Lee household, Michael tells his mother that Bug's father will not be returning. And we see later Chris and Snoop accosting Bug's father on his way home from the store. Chris inquires about the father's sexuality, and as he presses the point, he gets Bug's father to admit to having homosexual relations in prison. He proceeds to ask if he lives with kids right now, and when the stepfather acknowledges, Chris beats him to a bloody pulp in a rage as Snoop looks on. Back at home, Michael calmly readies himself for sleep.
Wow, from a grim opening to a grim ending.
That's right. Yeah, we're starting to see the darkness beginning to grow in Michael here. He actually is now enjoying the power that he has here, thanks to, marking his father for death. He visits with Chris and Snoop and points him out, and it's a topic of some discussion about Chris's past and what he sees here in Michael. It's obviously a topic of much discussion. But I like that the show doesn't feel the need to give these details. In a way, it just doesn't seem to matter. His stare that he gives the man is icy enough, I think.
Mm. Yeah, there's this weird kindred spirit connection, isn't there, between Chris and Michael, as Michael marks him for death, as you put it. Snoop is a little bit, come on, explain what's gone on with this, like, I'm kind of in the dark here. And Michael just looks over at Chris with this look of affirmation on his face. And that look is just fantastic, and it's such a long close-up of both Michael and Chris's faces. There's this just weird kindred spirit thing that's established there.
Mm. Yeah, Michael seems to have found his place, even if it is a rather sinister one.
Yeah, and then of course that brings on they of course save it for the finale, for extra dramatic resonance. And there's a really long build-up. There's some really sort of brooding, lingering shots of the darkened Michael household, and that sort of kind of elation from Michael, I guess you could call it. Sort of this impending elation. And then the mum is obviously getting very jittery, wondering what's going on. And they just pull the rug out from under us as Chris completely steps out of character and just goes to town. Absolutely goes to town in a very intensely filmed segment of the show.
Well, we'd normally expect a quick, calculated kill, but this is quite the opposite. We have Chris going out of his way, or not really going out of his way, but expressing a desire to not make it painful for people and going to make it quick and going to make it efficient. And then here, obviously, like you say, he goes absolutely nuts. And, of course, Snoop's response is just wonderful as well. His incredible ability to snap us back into the humour, despite the incredible brutality that we just saw.
Mm.
The beating just goes on and on and on. It just absolutely messes him up and maybe even unnerves Snoop a little bit, which is saying something.
Definitely, yeah. And of course they finally explicitly mention the whole child rape thing that sort of underlies everything just before he dies. That they do go so far as to explicitly sort of make it clear that that's what it's all about. And then, of course, through Chris's actions and his emotional connection to this death, they then establish somewhat of Chris's past. It's sort of telling a very intricate story about both Michael and Chris here.
Well, it's all assumed, isn't it? I mean, he may
Yeah.
have an emotional connection to it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this has happened to Chris in the past.
No, that's very true.
You know, it is all assumed. I think I consider it a topic of some discussion, but I'm not sure it's a given. Like unless it's been stated by the writer or David Simon or someone who was involved in that episode or that production who can clarify that that's exactly what they intended. That is based on assumption. It seems it's not a guarantee or a given that this must have happened to Chris. I don't think he does have an emotional attachment to it clearly, but that doesn't automatically mean it must have happened to him or the same thing happened to him.
That's certainly a good point. I will agree. I think a lot of fans do like to really project that onto Chris, just to up the intrigue for the character more than anything. Just to make us imagine, really, I guess, where Chris came from, had some sort of origin story. But you are right that there's so much silence in the scene, there's so little information divulged that we can't really make a really conclusive statement on that. So it is nice that you sort of rein it back there. And of course,
it does help to reinforce a certain mystique about Chris's character as well, because he is such a powerful force in the show. It's better, in a way, not to reveal all, because then that uniqueness, whatever it is in Chris, and the way that he carries himself in the show as a character is compelling, because we're not quite sure how someone could become that way. What life must they have led in order to become that person? In a way, it's not revealed to us, but it's hinted at, it's suggested at, and people obviously have assumed certain things as a result, and that just adds to the mystique of his character.
Oh, no doubt, certainly. And of course, there is a very important plot point as he concludes the proceedings. He then takes a big spit just to extend his emotional kind of disgust of everything. And obviously, that's his one misstep on the show. It does come back to haunt him in season 5, as they do. The homicide detectives do link it to him, and find there's a way to get him arrested. But it's a very feasible trip-up point. If there's one point in the show where Chris can feasibly make a mistake and it is convincing, now's the time for it. So, yeah, that DNA provision, Chris, you gotta watch it.
Yeah, it's a slip up, that's for sure, and Snoop is quick to point that out in what is otherwise a pretty funny line.
Yeah, she's not particularly fussed about the whole kicking and screaming and punching thing. She's more concerned about the lack of nearby vacants. Didn't wait to get him in the house. So, yeah, it's just pretty hilarious the way she reacts to things.
I don't know, I think there was a certain mark of maybe not disgust or anything like that, but of seeing something that she maybe hadn't seen before from Chris as she was watching him, beat the guy to a pulp. Like, I don't think that was maybe quite that level of brutality that she'd seen before from Chris.
Yeah, that's true. Not that she's any stranger to brutality herself, but it is kind of a new experience, I guess.
We don't hear anything
how they used to do
similar.
Things.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't hear anything similar from their past either. It's not like we're hearing about some, Brandon-esque mutilation that they've performed at some point. It is all very quick and efficient and over painlessly, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But Chris clearly makes an exception here. I mean, granted, with the intensity of the scene, there's some very strong implications towards Chris's character, but it is still never quite explained. This incredible hatred could come from a couple of areas for all I know. I guess I'm not really tempted to say for certain because it is never explicitly stated in the show, and it's, to my knowledge, it's not been clarified by anyone on the show, I don't think. But by all means, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's the Stanfield organisation.
All right. Okay, let's move on.
Let's take a look at the school. So we have Prez mentioning the sudden increase in the temperature of his room to his colleague Grace Sampson. Grace explains that at this time of year the school switches to longer classes for exam prep, and that increasing the temperature makes the kid drowsy and less disruptive. Meanwhile, in the special class, Miss Duquette organises a role-playing exercise with Kwame and Darnell Tyson pretending to be at a restaurant. Mr. Colvin and Parenti are called away by Marcia Donnelly, and she tells them that despite the class being especially aimed at socialising disruptive students, they still have to follow the school board's missive that they teach to the upcoming test. She also informs them that the assistant superintendent has requested a meeting.
Ooh.
So starting off with Prez and his classroom being too hot, which we sort of mentioned a little bit already in how it is right next to the scene with Bodie about it being too cold.
Yeah, and obviously it's just another way of providing a slightly disbelieving reason for teaching, or at least, sort of desperate measures teaching. In this case, sleeping is better than being boisterous. We'd rather you sort of sleep than disrupt through drowsy heating temperatures, I guess.
Yeah, they have to go to the extent of sedating the children in order for them to be in the classroom.
I don't know who came up with that idea, but maybe it really does work wonders.
Yeah, it seems a little bit sinister. Trying to putting them under for the sake of
gassing
getting them
the
through this class. Yeah. Start pumping in soothing music as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure that'll work too well. But yeah, it's just another one of those sort of demonstrations of the distance between worlds, I guess.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we skip over to the special class, where they're taking the next logical step from the restaurant episode, and they're sort of getting the kids to learn the manners they observed.
Yeah, they're just being taught some pretty basic social skills. And you're nice to people, they're more likely to do things for you,
Yeah,
Just
and of course
these basic manners.
they're doing a pretty spectacularly bad job of it, actually. I think is it Zenobia who's sort of... Actually, no, it's Darnell, actually, in this scene, isn't it? And
there's no ones later where...
yeah,
we have a bit of a fight break out. But in this one, it is Kwame and Darnell at the restaurant.
and we see that there's just little moments of friction that just sort of escalate into these... It never works, basically. I mean, each sentence is going to have some sort of problem with it that escalates. So it's certainly no masterclass like Namond gives us later.
And that they end up getting called out as well by Donnelly, being told that there's no avoiding the test, and that they're going to have to speak to Shepherdson, Miss Shepherdson, the assistant superintendent who comes in later, and we see her.
That's right, yeah.
I think there's a couple of interesting points here, starting with... I was going to mention in Prez's bit, it's nice that we see him already trying to concoct a plan to defy these test rules. Prez is in many ways the ultimate underdog in the show. I mean, there's Carcetti as well, but with Prez, because he's on a much smaller scale, in a way, it makes him the underdog of underdogs.
Yeah,
he's just dealing with one classroom rather than an entire city.
He's making his difference there, yeah. And then, of course, I like the way that they then obviously arrange the chat with Colvin, and they can use those two to really make it clear that these two really are these sort of peas in a pod characters, Prez and Colvin, both really, really going against the grain to make a difference, and that they both really feel that that's a very important part of what they're doing here. And obviously, yeah, with Prez, it's the case of balancing your lessons with things that impress the superintendent and things that actually make a difference to the kids.
Yeah.
And with Colvin, it is, well, just making a very good plea for the logic of kind of a socialization lesson. And obviously that's not something against which the conventional exams can be tested on. But if you were to sort of think outside of that system, think about reinventing it. That's the sort of foundation that you might want to use to really make some real change, and Colvin's really trying to make that point. Obviously, the system at the moment is too ingrained to really listen to that and to enact that as a proper change.
Yeah, well, it's in that socialization class, we the greatest cause of commotion amongst the other students is, I think when is it Kwame orders a grape soda, that like causes the greatest amount of commotion in the class. I'm not sure why that's controversial, but
I guess it might be the
apparently
randomness factor. I guess it's just sort of
yeah.
who orders a grape soda. Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the thing that interests them the most about that class. So I guess there's arguments for how engaging or how effective it may be. But then, of course, Colvin and Parenti... Sorry,
I was just saying, any excuse for a little bit of a sort of off-topic laughter, they'll go for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, what were you seeing?
So yeah, they Colvin and Parenti, they get hauled outside to find out that they may have caused a little bit of damage in how they're sort of being perceived outside the school. Superintendent wants to come along and find out what exactly it is that they're getting up to. I like that Donnelly's sort of radio walkie-talkie that she's got. It makes it feel a bit more like one of the police officers with all that chatter going on rather than a school. It really does push this corruption of the school environment and how the world of crime is infecting all of these institutions, and that even in a school they have to communicate over radio and sort of keep in touch and maintain this authority over the school just because of the amount of troubles that they're having. Just pushes that whole idea with a mere prop.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And obviously it's a classically resigned Donnelly who's very much accustomed to these realities and having to disappoint the teachers all the time, and but she gets things across efficiently as she can and expects the usual backlash. There's that kind of resignation to her that she does very well. And yeah, it's just a shame because the potential nails in the coffin here of our new day, or certainly an element of our new day that the show is trying to put forward at this point. The progress that's finally being made in Bunny's class is being shut down from on high by the looks of it as a drive to improve this basic performance. So,
well, Donnelly is so done being sorry. And she may have been sorry for having to deliver all of this news in the past, or sympathetic with perhaps what certain teachers were trying to achieve, etc., etc. But now it's just, I'm telling you this now, this is the way it is. On to the next person. She's
just completely worn down. Like she's got no sort of accommodation left for emotions. Yeah, so they make a real intense plea to the superintendent. And there's a real honesty to the discussion, mainly brought about through Colvin. It really feels sort of completely groundbreaking in this sort of context. And
well, we're not quite at the meeting itself, but I can do the bit for that now, seeing as we should probably move on anyway. So at the meeting itself, we have Parenti and Colvin discussing the pupils' recent visit to a restaurant with Miss Shepherdson, the assistant superintendent. She is insistent that they will teach the test. Parenti is enraged that Shepherdson is undermining the programme's efforts, even though they clearly stated their aims at the outset. And Colvin tries to explain the futility of insisting that the children in the class be treated like every other student. Shepherdson is sceptical about excluding these children from standard practices. Praise is also later observed by Shepherdson as he teaches test questions to uninterested students. But as soon as she leaves, Prez has the class return to his normal lesson plan, which is teaching probabilities using dice games, and the class eagerly responds. Randy faces bullying in the corridors as rumours of his snitching spreads, and he gets the cold shoulder from his friend Karim in class when looking for a partner to roll dice with. So 3 bits there. We have the meeting with the superintendent that you just started to touch on, and the probabilities with Prez as he undermines what's going on with Shepherdson, sort of doing that little bit just to please her and then going back to what he really wants to do. And then in addition to that, we have a little bit of Randy feeling the first effects of his name being spread as being a snitch.
Yeah, so quickly going back to the superintendent chat with Colvin. So it's, as I was saying, a very honest discussion, and there seems like there's even more light being shed here than we normally see in any of the police department chats, in terms of like the actual meaning of the duking stuff being clearly discussed and understood, and really getting across that point that he wants to, and yeah, just sort of demonstrating that double act for Prez and Colvin, both dedicated to that change of the educational system, and despite the adversity he's faced, it feels like Colvin's personal prize when Namond mentions his name, because later on Carver asks him if he's got any other family members really, and
spoke his name with a measure of respect.
Exactly, yeah. And if he's not going to get any respect from the superintendent, like, Namond's kind of mentioning is his sort of personal badge there, the measure of the progress he's made with him. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really great impassioned stance that he has on the special classroom. Colvin delivers his argument brilliantly, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I can't
But
really
we're
recite
dealing
it
with
now,
a superintendent who's probably just looking for an excuse to shut it down and get rid of something that's, something that she just doesn't want to have to deal with.
Yeah, it's not to say that she can't hear the arguments. Like, I'm sure she's fully understanding of them, but she's, her position, her responsibilities. There's no way she could put in the work required to actually entertain what this reform wants, and the idea that you'd have to kind of lay off the exams, which is how we normally measure progress. We have to find a new way to do it, but no, you're going to have to lay off and actually do the exam so that your school can be measured favourably.
Prez, meanwhile, has no intention of having such an honest conversation. He instead just makes it look as though he's doing the right thing and waits for her to leave. Yeah,
that's a good point, actually. It's a bit of a difference. He's certainly laying all his eggs into the probabilities basket, isn't he?
Yeah.
The kids clearly love learning it. Even on a special curriculum, I'm not sure if it's that healthy to... maybe they're just catching up with it, but I like the fact that we're back on probabilities again. It sort of feels like it's been the main subject they've been learning.
And then during this, and a bit before as well, Randy is starting to feel the effects of his word being put out on the street, and fortunately he has Michael there who's willing to partner up with him. Yeah,
still got his friends close for the moment. Yeah, but it is bad, yeah. His worst fears are now sort of coming to fruition.
Yeah. He's about to see the nightmare come into being, which is a rather horrible arc that we will have to deal with as Season 4 progresses to its climax.
Yeah, not long to go. And of course there's the scene where the superintendent then looks at Colvin's class, does a little inspection over there, and typically, as you might expect, the class just isn't working at all.
Oh, we haven't got to that bit yet.
Oh, sorry, gosh. All right.
You're getting very excited. But that's next, so that's actually the last part of the school section, so we'll do that now. So Shepardson observes the special class with Principal Withers. A fight ends up breaking out between Zenobia and Chandra as the class performs another role-playing exercise. Miss Mason is knocked over in the ensuing brawl, and Shepardson is dismayed, which is compounded when Withers admits that this is the first time he has actually observed the class. The superintendent eventually discusses the program with the other teachers afterwards, and her cynicism is obvious. Donnelly gives her support, and Colvin, Duquette and Parenti are passionate about continuing. Miss Mason, however, is not optimistic about the prospect of the program having any long-lasting positive effect on the student participants. So yeah, you were saying that she ends up taking a look inside this special class and doesn't arrive on their best day, as they try to put it. But
no, very typically to be expected, I guess. Unlike Prez, who was sort of demonstrating a pretty good impression there of the sort that they'd want to see. But yeah,
he had a facade, whereas here they're trying to remove that. They're trying to get rid of that whole idea of masking yourself. They just want to present honest socializing where people can just be themselves, but at the same time learn real social skills.
That's very true, actually. Yeah, of course they perhaps shouldn't have got Zenobia up in the seat. A little bit too provocative at the moment for for the health of the classroom. But yeah,
Principled to a fault, perhaps.
yeah, it just adds ammunition to whatever the superintendent can say in her defence, really. And there's that chainsaw moment for Mr. Withers that he did refer to back at the start of the group when it was being set up. I'm the one who sticks around when the chainsaw comes out, and he's very loyal to his people. Like he actually stands behind the group here, despite the pressure that his school is under.
But he's done that whilst also distancing himself from the project.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
this
is
Miss
true,
Donnelly
actually.
deals with this. I haven't even seen this before. Though, but it has my full support. That doesn't really act as particularly convincing to the superintendent or assistant superintendent.
Yeah, my name's at the top of the paper, but it's, not really me. Sorry, guys.
Which undermines his support, really.
Yeah, it's not really a valid excuse. It still falls down to him, doesn't it? Yeah.
But Donnelly at least gives her support.
Yeah.
But Shepperton seems a little bit more convinced by Miss Mason, who, as we have seen, has been making arguments about the kids' more deep-seated issues, and that this is not something that mere socialising can fix because the kids are far more seriously mentally damaged than that.
Yeah. I mean, they're pointing out all the benefits of it, the academic benefits, the psychological ones, and just the wider social ones. But, superintendent always brings it back to what's good at the moment, and she's making a relatively good point from the perspective I can see it. Like, when you're measuring that progress from the exam perspective, there is no design for an accommodation of this nature of learning. And would the increased socialisation necessarily lead to greater learning? Would it fade quickly when back in the class following socialisation? I mean, it's an unnecessary risk when everything should be subservient to the stats. So that's certainly a slightly more closed-minded view that doesn't consider the potential for changing the system. But from within the current system, it's certainly a very good point to make.
Well, it's made very clear throughout the process of this special class that there is no real end goal. They're not building up towards anything. On a couple of occasions, they are just encouraging each other to see where it goes and to see what happens and to try this out and see how they respond to this. And there's a sort of research and development side to this classroom, whereas with this state testing and the like, there is a clear syllabus, there's a clear structure to the lessons and how they unfold over the weeks and months, and then the final test at the end. And there's no such thing here. And the superintendent, obviously, their job is comes through the value of the results that they get, and of course the stats that they get, and the structure of the world that they operate in. Whereas this special class is a threat to that, because I guess it's it's more personal, more directed towards the kids specifically, but also requires more resources, more time consuming, and is less clearly structured, as we said. Yeah,
it's more qualitative, isn't it? You can't really quantify what's going on here in terms of school progress. So it is certainly very difficult to justify it.
Okay, so if you're ready, we can move on to our very final strand, which is made up of one section, so it will also be our last part for the recap.
Okay.
Okay, so Herc, this is our major crime section, of course. Herc visits Bubbles and tries to enlist his help in retrieving the missing camera. Bubbles is outraged that Herc is asking him for more favours when Herc has broken his promises. But Bubbles again asks for help with the drug addict who has been robbing him, and Herc makes another promise to help. Herc provides Bubbles with a phone and some money, and instructs him to call as soon as possible he sees his tormentor even. Herc discusses his problem about the missing camera with Officer Dozeman and Sidner. Sidner urges Herc to go straight to the lieutenant before the situation gets worse, but Herc is worried about Marimo's reaction. He tries to confess to Marimo eventually and is faced with hostility. Bubbles spots his antagonist and attempts to call Herc during the meeting, but Herc ignores his calls. Marimo threatens Herc with an internal investigations division case, and Herc is eventually intimidated into withholding the information about the camera. But Bubbles becomes frustrated with Herc and decides to get revenge by calling him up about a fictitious drug resupply in progress, when he instead gives him the license plate of a minister's car. Herc obviously jumps at the opportunity and organises a traffic stop, and is aggressive towards the minister, whom he stops, throwing his possessions onto the sidewalk and searching his car. The upset minister demands to know Herc's name and badge number. So our whole Herc and Bubbles saga going on here, where we have him contacting Bubbles again in the first place, offering another promise to help him. We have his whole thing where he's discussing his problem, ending up trying to go the honest route, and that not working, and that also being the reason why he misses Bubbles' call, which prompts Bubbles' revenge.
Yeah.
So quite a lot going on there. We'll start off with Herc obviously being quite manipulative now with Bubbles, and it's quite sad to see.
The offering of the food.
Yeah, he's really taking advantage of how vulnerable he is. I think Bubbles makes a pretty good job of sticking up for himself, but he also recognises the difficulty in his situation. So he has to take whatever help he can get, really. Yeah,
it's just completely misunderstanding the situation. No connecting of the dots is there. So, Herc does admit a small dose of wrongdoing on the last time, but goes straight into more of what he needs from this case, from Bubs. And it's just not enough tact to really... If you do want to rope Bubbles into this, you need to show the right level of empathy and sympathy and respect, and he's just completely got it all wrong. So it's so frustrating to watch scenes like this with her, because we know he's completely going to bottle this. It doesn't matter whether you've seen the show before or not, and despite some surprising lengths he's gone to set it up this time, it's still going to go completely wrong. And to be fair, the reason it goes completely wrong in this episode is slightly marginally more legit. Like, there's an element of feeling sorry for Herc in that situation, but still, like, it's pretty unforgivable considering you've already messed up once.
Yeah, there's a nice little parallel here as well to what's going on with the Stanfields, in that Sydney gives Herc very similar advice to that which Bodie gives to little Kevin about coming clean, making sure you be honest. That's the easiest way out of this situation. And in both instances, with little Kevin approaching Marlowe and with Herc approaching Marimo, their desire to be truthful doesn't actually end up too well. I mean, it ends up being fatal for little Kevin. It doesn't end up that bad for Herc, unfortunately, but he does still end up finding his honesty to not meet keen ears.
That's a very good point, actually, yeah. There's a nice theme of fessing up there amongst the two of them.
Yeah.
And it's pretty bold that the Herc does eventually go and do it. Like, it's such an un-Herc thing to do, but I guess that he really does understand that he's reached the end of his tether here. It was cool to see Sydney take that rare initiative, lay out a pretty harsh set of steps for Herc, and step up to the leadership mark where, there was really some big shoes to fill. I like how a lot of the scene with Marimo, there's just references to the legacy of Freeman's work on Stanfield, and his work keeps leaving this paper trail that keeps turning up at the door of the MCU, and making it ever clearer how little Herc is actually achieving here.
I mean, Marimo is quite easy to hate on in some ways, I suppose, but he is very smart. He figures out Herc really quickly, and is quite an experienced unit killer, it seems.
Yeah.
As he has been described before. And also, as you said, it's nice to see Lester's subpoenas still coming back to the office.
Yeah, he's clearly got a legacy that he's left behind. And then, of course, there's the timing of Bubbles' phone call during this meeting, which is very painful to watch. Still Herc's fault, really, that he doesn't respond on this, but, there's a small element of understanding. There's no indication that once he's had this meeting, which doesn't go on very long by the looks of it, that he calls him right back and tries to get the job done. be nice to have seen that, or at least acknowledge that he did at least try that, but perhaps he didn't. So
we end up with, we end up with obviously
the
Herc
church
failing.
ministers.
Yeah, Herc fails Bubbles again, and so Bubbles wants to get his revenge. So yeah, he spots this. Is it PR8ZGOD? Praise God, license plate, and the not so reverend.
Yeah. Praise God, yeah.
Of course, naturally, when Herc gets this call about some, what does he call it in as, like a drug resupply, a re-up?
Yeah.
And of course, Herc calls out all the cavalry and just goes maximum. Like, he gets the helicopter and everything.
It's brilliant,
I think
isn't it?
Bubs may not have expected his revenge to be quite that effective.
Mm.
It's also nice that we go from potentially disliking this minister. He's obviously, for someone who's supposed to be a reverend, he's not showing any sympathy for this rather poor, downtrodden Bubbles. Doesn't even seem to even acknowledge that he exists, really. And yet, you do also feel sorry for him at his treatment at the hands of Herc, who is obviously an absolute brute and makes all these wild assumptions. And even if the guy was a genuine suspect, it's just totally unnecessary to treat someone who is clearly quite elderly in such a physical manner.
It's a catastrophic violation, isn't it, what he does, and just typical dose of Herc-tinged violence to it.
Yeah.
You can just feel the brutality claim coming in, and just logistically on Herc's part, just problems all around. The second time he's jumped out on a hokey lead, the first time, of course, was the Marlowe setup at the station, and
he just never questions it. He gets one, so it must be true. This is it. Oh, that's from an informant, so that's actually happened. Let's act on it immediately and not consider consequences, or even whether it's actually true.
Exactly. Like, this is where he needs to learn that leads should come organically. Like, there certainly needs to be more prepared for the notion that a lead tip-off might be designed to work against him. Like, there's just, all Herc sees is the potential thrill of the chase we gather here. Like, it's all of a sudden it's this call for an action scene in a movie, and he's got to be there to watch it. And let's do it. Let's do it, boys. Let's bring the choppers in. Let's bring out the bells and whistles for the ultimate thrill of the street. Like, it's a real Herc moment, and I get to catch Marlowe in the process, so it's a real win-win for me.
All right, anything else you want to add about major crimes and about Herc and Bubbles?
No, I think that probably covers it all. I guess Officer Walker goes through his own little car chase at the start, doesn't he? And then Herc goes through one at the end. Obviously, Herc, this is the point where Herc actually leaves the police force. I believe this is what gets him fired. So, an interesting sort of parallel there between the two. Walker still walks on in the police department.
That's right. No justice there.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I think that's the recap dealt with then.
Man, you gotta look at it from Marlowe's point of view. I mean, shit, how it's different from Wallace?
Because Stringer said Wallace snitched.
Yo, Kevin might have snitched too.
Man, but he didn't. Yeah. And we had to do Wallace.
Yo, Marlowe thought he had to do Kevin.
Man, but he didn't. That's what I'm saying. It's a cold motherfucker.
It's a cold world, Bodie.
Thought you said it was getting warmer, nigga.
World going one way, people another, yo.
Right, let's take a look at our final sections then, and we'll start this week, I think, with our title, Misgivings. It's worth noting in this episode, of course, that there's a lot of people making judgments based on poor assumptions or things that they decisions that are a little bit uneasy. So, for example, we have Marlowe's caution with little Kevin is just kind of made this assumption that it's going to be a problem, and so away with him.
Yeah. And that extends to Randy as well, who, understandably, they kind of put a snitch label on him, but again, that didn't actually need to happen given the circumstances. The list goes on, doesn't it, really? What's the best example?
Well, Michael makes, I suppose, a sort of an uneasy decision about what to do about
His dad.
his father.
Yeah.
So he's obviously not quite sure what the result of that is going to be, but I think he has a pretty good idea. But also, there's wider implications, and implications just for himself as a person. I mean, despite everything, he's still marking his own father for death, which is as part of his initiation to a much darker world.
Yeah. So that definitely works.
We have, I suppose, the assistant superintendent and her misgivings about the special class.
Yeah, very true.
And she's not the only person that feels that way. Obviously, Miss Mason has some misgivings about it too.
Then you have, I guess, Carver with his misgivings about Namond's intent in the street, and he really sees how, learns very harshly how Namond out on the street is actually a much more complicated issue than just a few corner boys being mischievous.
Daniels has misgivings about Carcetti after what appears to be a massive U-turn in his commitments to sorting the city's crime problem.
Yeah, very good point, yeah. And, yeah, Clay has misgivings about, pretty much everyone, I guess.
So, yeah, a lot of, basically, I mean, it's sort of quite a literal title. There are just a lot of misgivings in the episode. But it's kind of nice to be able to work that kind of theme across a whole episode.
Because it really does let you
nice.
sort of go through the list, doesn't it? And you can find all sorts of examples.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have our epigraph, which is delivered by Poot this episode.
That's right. World going one way, people another, yo. Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, good to see Poot getting a mention on the epigraphs. Not the sort of character you necessarily expect. I guess it kind of feeds into this climate change idea that the episode's been going with a little bit on the whole temperature front.
Well, the interesting thing about this epigraph is I remember the first time that I heard it, and sort of even maybe the second time when I considered it a little bit more amongst other epigraphs, I always thought it was a bit something and nothing, or it didn't quite connect as a line. But after a while, it did kind of click with me about the idea of how, you know, Bodie says to him, I thought you were saying it was getting, or it's going to be getting warmer. But he's saying about how the people on the streets are becoming very cold and ruthless, and the game is getting more fierce, whilst the world itself is going the way of getting hotter. So we have global warming, but sort of people cooling, if you like.
Yeah, that's a very nice way of putting it. It's very similar to the Slimline, isn't it? That game the same.
Just
world
got more
the same.
fierce.
Game just got more fierce, yeah.
That's right, yeah.
So it's got the same sort of sentiment of just the idea of the escalating morals, or the escalating downfall of morals brought about by Marlowe, and the sort of religion he brings with him, almost. Yeah.
Maybe a bit. It's about the idea of how trying to push out-of-date measures on the crime problem. So, for example, Burrell is doing his big stance with the duking of the stats and getting all of these quote-unquote quality of life arrests.
Yeah.
About how, in reality, the world is trying to go the way of being more progressive. What the world needs is something to actually solve these problems a little bit more at the heart, whereas the people themselves are still trying to push back against that. Or Burrell, in particular, is still trying to push back against that, amongst others.
Yeah. Nope,
These sort of opposing forces.
All right. What about the scenes? Any particular scenes that stood out for you this episode?
Well, I mean, I do really like the opening scene. I think it's just it's really quite clever, the ability to take something that this is a character like Donut, who is normally a bit of a source of humour and has had plenty of funny moments so far, and we see him getting caught in this car, but seeing with someone like Walker is a little bit worrying, just because we know what a nasty guy he is, and it does end up being even worse than a first-time viewer might have hoped.
Yeah.
It's really, really brutal. That crack of his fingers is really sort of emphasised in the Foley on the soundtrack. So yeah, that's a pretty brutal opening scene, and I really like the last shot just before the title starts. This power relationship being made very clear.
Oh yeah, no, that's a very good choice. I think the stuff with Michael and his dad at the end, again, creating for very much uncomfortable watching, but very captivating watching. And it's incredibly longly drawn out at the end as well. There's so many scenes that sort of go on for 20, 30 seconds without you really realising, because the show's just giving you so much time to reflect on these pretty grim events here. Even if it's just a shot of Michael's face, it's just kind of, it's that sort of shot that you're really gonna enjoy. And the stuff with Carver and Namond was good. Certainly.
Well, of course, I should add that, as I've mentioned, the brutality of the opening scene, there's also the brutality going on at the end of the episode as well, of course, with the actual incident itself with Chris and Michael's dad. It just stands out because it is so uncharacteristic for a killer who is normally so calculated and just seems to lose it here, just loses control.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly trumps the finger breaking, not by that much, but it does make more of an impact.
In terms of its brutality, certainly.
Yeah, what they intended, yeah. So, yeah, interesting how they have those two ultra-violent bookends.
I also really, just that one particular moment, I think that Bodie's very good in this episode as well. He does the reaction when he learns about little Kevin being killed, and there's a lot of realizations going on at once there, which is amplified by the shot that you mentioned where it's zooming away from the corner and revealing this Royce poster, and is a sort of a callback to what feels like a simpler, better, calmer, dare I say even more peaceful time.
Yep.
Certainly by comparison.
Yeah.
It felt like even to us as viewers, it felt like the problems that they were dealing with in the pit were nothing compared to what we're dealing with now. Certainly not the problems that Bodie is dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that sense of progression, very well explained here. And yeah, it's just not looking good for a lot of characters now, is it?
Yeah, it's all getting pretty tragic, which is very much the way of the end of season 4.
Yeah. All right.
Right, so yeah, that's season 4, episode 10, Misgivings. What have we got next week?
I think we've got A New Day. So we've been hearing a lot about that concept, so we've got that episode next week to discuss.
That's right. Well, thanks very much for joining us again, and thanks very much to we had Damon and Corey who contacted us via email, and we've also been getting a few comments on the YouTube and like as well. We're seeing all of your comments on there, so thanks very much for getting in touch. Also had a few comments on the website itself on a couple of the articles, because I did ask a question about why it was such an issue. I asked one of our commentators if they could clarify why it was such an issue that the school be taken over by the state. And this was actually answered in great detail. I mean, I wouldn't normally look at the to the website comments to read out. I'd normally restrict that to just the emails, but it does go into great detail on how the takeover affects everyone down the line, because all of the goals, the school itself is somewhat independent in that it sets a lot of its own goals. Although it doesn't really feel like that so much here in this school, because although they may be setting their own goals, they also seem a bit of a slave to the overall institution of the school system, perhaps handed down to them by the state anyway, seeing as they are called state examinations. But he also touches on, this is from a user called D. Macario. I assume that's sort of I'm not sure if that's just an alias or their first initial and surname, but they do go into more details as well about there being a pride element for someone like Donnelly, who, has worked decades in these public schools, and if the state were to take over, that would kind of be a bit of a slap in the face to all the hard work that she's done in order to help keep the school afloat. So that was kind of an idea that they were talking about. Yeah, so just acknowledging. Well, I'm seeing all of the comments and everything on everywhere. So thanks very much for contributing. You can always send an email to us or get in contact, caughtonthewire@gmail.com, and check out the website where there's all the episodes available for download, links to YouTube, and more information about the show at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. And until next week, take care of yourselves and happy wire watching.
See ya.